Aloha, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to Hawaiian IANDS. We're very happy that you are here joining us. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, Susan will put a link in to the chat. And also, as a reminder, this is all volunteer. As SAI, we don't charge for anything. We're a small show here. And any donations that anybody would like to give, time, talent, or treasure would be awesome. So thank you very much. With that, I'm very excited to introduce my friend. New friend, but I feel like I've known her forever, Dr. Yvonne Kason. And Dr. Yvonne Kason, MD, MED, CCFP, FCEP, all kinds of degrees. And what I love about her is because I'm very right and left brain, and she's a doctor and a researcher and so smart, but she's also an experiencer. So that is just really cool. Yvonne is the co-founder and president, as you heard, of Spiritual Awakenings International. She's a multi-experiencer. She's had 5 NDEs, 2 in her childhood, 3 in her adult life, as well as multiple Sdes. She's the past president of IANDS in 2019, 2020. Dr. Kason is the first person who coined the phrase spiritually transformative experiences back in 1994. She's a retired family physician and transpersonal MD psychotherapist, previously on faculty at the University of Toronto, an internationally recognized expert on NDEs and other SDEs. She has 40 years of experience counseling SDE experiencers. She co-founded the Kundalini Research Network in 1990 and the Spirituality and Healthcare Network in 2000. Dr. Kason has 5 published books, her most recent, Touched by the Light, exploring spiritually transformative experiences, in 2019. She's made hundreds of professional presentations, podcasts, meetings, interviews, and is a frequent keynote speaker. She was a recent guest on the Dr. Oz Show and on Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Kason lives in Toronto, Canada, and enjoys snowboarding in Encinitas, California. And I'm so grateful for you to be here and excited.
Thank you, Shaun. Thank you for that really wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. It is absolutely my pleasure to be here speaking to Hawaiian IANDS. And I also wanted to say, I think Robert Baer expressed it, but I also wanted to say how absolutely delighted I am that Hawaiian IANDS is now a Spiritual Awakenings International affiliated group, and how delighted I am that Shaun is now facilitating our SAI, that's what we call Spiritual Awakenings International for short, SAI, our SAI experience through sharing circles. And so it's wonderful. And Shaun, I'm delighted. This is my first time speaking to Hawaiian IANDS, so I'm really, really happy that you invited me. So I'm going to be screen sharing for much of my presentation. So I'm just going to try and get my screen share up right now. Hopefully it'll work and everybody can see it. And if you want your best viewing experience, what you can do is you can hide the pictures of everybody else on your screen by just wanting to have 0 pictures, and then you'll be able to see all of my slides. For some reason, I'm not seeing myself. Hopefully you guys will be able to see me as well as the slides. So what I'm going to be talking about today is discovering spiritually transformative experiences, my inner and my outer journey. And as Shaun mentioned, I do have a number of degrees, and I am president of Spiritual Awakenings International. And everything I'm going to be talking about today is in my book, Touched by the Light. This is the book that I released just over a year ago, Touched by the Light, Exploring Spiritually Transformative Experiences. So I'm going to start off by telling you what my conclusions are. And then I'll go through my journey, how I got to my conclusions, and tell you my conclusions again. So what have I learned in over 40 years of researching spiritually transformative experiences? Well, I've learned that we are not just these physical bodies, and hopefully all of you know that already, but we are immortal souls. We are souls living in these bodies, and that when we die, it's like shedding clothes. We step out of these bodies and our souls live on after death, and we reincarnate. Secondly, that STEs, or spiritually transformative experiences, are real. They are not hallucinations. They are not signs of mental illness. And the range of human consciousness is expanding. That what used to be considered paranormal, to be having, mystical experiences, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, is expanding, seems to be happening to more and more people. And this may be part of an expansion of consciousness that is actually evolution for all of the human species. So how did I, as a medical doctor, get interested in spiritually transformative experiences? Because it is a very unusual thing for a medical doctor to be specialized in. Well, what happened was, it happened because of my own personal experiences. So back when I was in medical school, back in 1976, I had what I now know was a Kundalini Awakening. But back then, I had no idea what this experience was. I was meditating. I had taken this meditation course, and I didn't take it because I wanted to have a transcendental experience. I took it because they advertised it would help you be calm for your exams, and you'd get better marks on your exams, etc. So, and we had a lot of exams in medical school. So I took this meditation course. I really loved meditating, so I started meditating regularly. And lo and behold, about 3 months after I started meditating, I had this experience, which I now know was a Kundalini Awakening. And what happened was, I felt this really powerful energy in the middle of my meditation. I felt this really powerful energy start rising up through my body and spine. And I heard this loud inner roaring noise. It was sort of like the roar of a waterfalls. And then all of a sudden, as this energy rushed with this noise, it felt like it went up my spine and out through the top of my head. And I expanded. And it seemed like I left my body and I was above my body. And who I think of as me was no longer just the size of my physical body, but I'd expanded to fill the space of this auditorium I was in. And then the most beautiful part was what I was feeling. I started feeling this incredible love. And I remember thinking, wow, no wonder people love to meditate. I thought this is what all the experienced meditators were experiencing every time they meditated. But lo and behold, when my meditation ended, the experience stopped, and I was not able to reproduce this when I was meditating on other occasions. And I didn't know what this was. But so I just put it out on my consciousness. I had a lot of exams to do. But later on, I realized that this, in fact, was a Kundalini Awakening. But later on, 3 years later, I had my next STE that I couldn't put out of my mind. It caught my attention very definitely. And I now know it was a near-death experience in 1979, March 27th, 1979. I was assigned in a medevac, a medical evacuation. I was a young doctor already at that time. I was doing my residency, and I was assigned to accompany a critically ill woman on a medevac in an airplane. And it was in a small twin propeller airplane called a Piper Aztec, and it was in winter in northern Ontario. The plane flew into bad weather. I'm just telling you all the stories I'm telling you today. I'm just giving you the condensed version so that I'll have time to cover everything I want to talk about today. If you want more details, I talk about it in more detail in all of my books. But We flew into bad weather, a storm. They say that the not the ice filters, what are they called? The air filters from both of the propeller engines must have frozen over from the snow and the ice storm. And basically one propeller stopped, then the other propeller stopped. So we were in the air and no propellers were going, and we started crashing into the ground. And if you ever wonder what it's like to be in a plane crash, it's incredible turbulence as the plane is going down, like the worst turbulence you've ever imagined. And so you definitely know the plane is going down. And I remember my first reaction as the plane was going through this terrible turbulence and crashing down to the ground was I was overwhelmed with this incredible fear and panic. And out of my heart, it just the thought leapt, oh God, help, I'm going to die. And I mean, I wasn't consciously trying to pray or meditate. It was just like panic. God help, I'm going to die. But it seems that was close enough to a prayer that is when my near-death experience began. And I'm pointing this out because it was actually before the plane crashed. It was while we were going down. And what happened was all of a sudden, this force field of peace started descending upon me. And it was literally like it was pushing down all of my fear and panic. And I felt completely calm and unafraid. And then I heard a voice in my mind. And prior to this time, I've never had experiences of hearing a voice in my mind. I heard a voice in my mind clearly, and it was a masculine voice, say the words, "Be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always." And with those words, this incredible spiritual vibration just penetrated my soul. And I was still alert. I was still awake. The plane had not crashed yet, but I was totally unafraid, facing whatever my fate may be. Anyway, the pilot managed through real heroism. He was later awarded for his heroism to guide the free-falling plane. And he pulled up the landing gear and he tried to do a belly landing on the surface of the ice of a semi-frozen lake. And we actually would have been okay, except when the plane came to a stop, when it skidded to a stop, the weight of the plane was more than the ice could bear. So the plane broke through the ice, nosedived very quickly, and then sunk into very deep water. So I had to very quickly get out of the plane while the plane was sinking. I managed to get out. I pulled the nurse out. I tried to pull the patient out, but was the two of us together, the nurse and I, could not get her out before the plane nosedived. She unfortunately went down with the plane. And the pilot managed to get out the other door. And there I found myself in this deep water, in the middle of winter, in the middle of a blizzard, and I had to swim a long distance through open, fast-moving water to the closest land. The place we had crashed was called Devil's Gap. And it's called Devil's Gap because it's a place in this Lake of the Woods near Kenora, where there's such a fast moving current that it's treacherous all year round. And in winter, the ice never freezes. So I had to swim the Devil's Gap to get to the closest land. Now I was still in this mystical state of peace. And the voice said in my head, "Swim to shore." But I remember thinking, I argued with this voice. I didn't know any better at that point. I'd not had these, higher guidance before. I remember thinking, no, I'm not going to swim to shore. That's too far. I took lifeguarding. They tell you don't swim to shore. You'll drown swimming to shore. The voice repeated, "Swim to shore." And, I was still arguing with it. But the third time the voice said, "Swim to shore," I sort of surrendered to it. And I started swimming the long, treacherous swim to shore. Fortunately, I was a very strong swimmer at that time. Anyway, what happened was I went under several times as I was swimming to shore, because it was really a very long and difficult swim. And when I would go under, just from sheer exhaustion, my heavy winter clothes, my boots, my winter coat were just pulling me into the water like dead weights. I would struggle with all of my energy, all of my might, to get my mouth above water again and gasp some air into my lungs. Partway swimming to shore is when my near-death experience deepened. That's the terminology they use in NDE research. And all of a sudden, I heard this loud roaring noise again, roar, like the roar of a waterfalls. And I found my consciousness pop out of my body. And suddenly I was like 20 or 30 feet above my body. But it was not that straightforward, because it was as if like a split screen TV, like we're watching right now, that there's the big image and then there's a tiny image in the corner. That the big image, or most of my consciousness, had gone out of my body and was now 20 or 30 feet above my body. But there was still a tiny bit of my consciousness, like the tiny image in the corner, that was still in my body, that was still alive and was still struggling to shore. So it literally was like my consciousness was at two places at the same time. Anyway, then I rose higher. The bulk of my consciousness rose even higher. And I rose into a realm filled with love and white light. And a lot of people talk about the light. And yes, there was light in this realm. It was like being at the top of the clouds as a plane is ascending and it's about to break into the sky, sunlit sky above the clouds. And it's all bright and glistening and soft and white. That's what it was like for me in the white light realm. But the most powerful thing was not the visual of the light. I did see a face in the light briefly, and then it faded into sort of the cloud-like periphery. But it was the love that I was feeling. I was feeling such incredible, powerful, unconditional love. It just felt like I was home. And somehow I knew things while I was in the light, not because I heard a voice or that someone explained it to me, like just somehow I knew things in my soul. I absolutely knew somehow that that love that I was feeling, this incredible unconditional love, was the love of our higher power, or what I had been taught to call God. And what I was experiencing God to be was not anything like what I had been taught God to be. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging us. Have you been good? Have you been bad? No. What I was actually experiencing was that God, or the higher power, whatever word you want to use for it, was like an infinite force that is interpenetrating all of creation, all of past, present, and future, that was infinitely intelligent and infinitely loving, that loved each of us unconditionally. And I also knew somehow, don't know how, I just knew. I knew that what I think of as me would live on, whether my body below that was still struggling to swim to shore lived or died. I knew that me would live on. And so I watched from above, and I watched the very heroic rescuers. Some helicopter pilots found us, and they managed to bring us by helicopter to the closest hospital. This was very heroic too. They were both rewarded with medals, etc., for their heroism. And I was taken to the closest hospital, and they landed the helicopter on the driveway of the hospital, and the staff came out, and they had like gurneys from the emergency department, those little stretchers, and they wheeled us in. And then they revived me because I was a near drowning victim and hypothermic, so almost frozen to death when they brought me into the hospital. And they resuscitated me by rewarming my body. They put my unconscious, near frozen body into the hot whirlpool baths in the physiotherapy department. And in that hot water is where I finally felt my consciousness re-enter my body. And what that felt like was whoosh, It's like how they depict a genie being sucked into a bottle, that I had been in this big, expansive place above my body, and whoosh, I was suddenly sucked down by some powerful force through the top of my head into the relatively smaller confines of my body. And then I knew I was back. Then I knew I was going to live. Now, this experience had tremendous after effects on me. I didn't know it was a near-death experience. I didn't know what it was. I didn't have a name to call this experience for years, but it had changed me in an incredibly powerful way. My spiritual focus had dramatically increased, and I had really a changed spiritual perspective. I just came out of this experience with the knowing in my heart, in my soul, that all the spiritual paths on earth, all the spiritual traditions were striving to understand the same one truth underlying the universe. But it was like coming up different paths, up different sides of the mountain, that just different faith traditions were coming up different angles, so they had different perspectives. But once they got to the top, once they got to experience the divine, it's the same one divine source that everybody was trying to understand from their own perspectives. So I became much more tolerant of people with diverse spiritual views. It just was clear to me that we were all spiritual brothers and sisters of the same one God. I also felt incredibly filled with love. It was like, for the first, I would say, 3 or 4 weeks, I'm really glad that they gave me a month off work, because I was recovering from my frostbite and from the water in my lungs from the near drowning, etc. Because I thought people would have thought I was a bit loopy, because it was like I brought some of that incredible love that I experienced back with me, and I was just drunk with love. I was just filled with love. I was oozing love when I first came back. I remember I was sitting in my living room. I'd look out the window and I'd see squirrels playing on my lawn, and I would just have waves of love for these squirrels coming out of my heart. Or I would see children riding down the street on their bicycles, and I'd have waves of love for these children coming out of my heart. Or I'd listen to music, and I'd have tears of joy and waves of love, because everything was so inspiring for me. I also had this incredible enhanced capacity to forgive that I had been feuding with my father for several years. You know how that happens when you're teenagers and young adults. And I actually hadn't spoken to him for a while before this experience. But when I had this experience, when I came back, suddenly all of the stuff that used to bother me before, it was irrelevant. It didn't matter. What did matter was the love, and that I loved him. And I phoned up my dad and I said, "Dad, I love you. Let's be friends." And I was able to forgive him for whatever things used to be so important to me. They just seemed irrelevant. I also had new clarity about relationships that didn't serve me, and I was able to shift into healthier relationships. I lost my fear of death. I was absolutely certain that, soul lives on after death. And then a few weeks later, guess what? I had a psychic awakening. I was driving to visit a friend. I was stopped at an intersection at a red light. And all of a sudden, while I was stopped at this intersection in my car, I had this clear visual image pop in my brain and in my mind, and I saw my friend's brain covered in pus. And somehow, I don't know how, but I absolutely knew it was my friend, the one I was going to visit. And I also, as a medical doctor, absolutely knew what this was symbolizing. It was meningitis. And when I arrived at my friend a little bit later, I asked her how she was feeling. And anyway, to make a long story short, later on that day, she was admitted through the emergency department, and she was in fact diagnosed and treated for acute meningitis. So that was the first of many psychic experiences that began to happen to me after this plane crash experience. And I also noticed an increase in my Kundalini symptoms, which is interesting. So I struggled for a long time trying to figure out what these experiences were. I knew they were not imagination or hallucinations because they were having such a profound positive impact on me. When I talked to some of my doctor friends, they tried to dismiss it as a hallucination. That I just couldn't accept that. I spoke with somebody who called themselves an NDE expert in Toronto back then, and they said to me, well, were you clinically dead? And I said, no, I don't think so. Maybe unconscious at best. And then he said, did you see a tunnel with a light at the end? And I said, no. And then he told me, it's clearly not a near-death experience. So I thought, well, if it's not a near-death experience, what is it? And similarly with what I now know is a Kundalini Awakening, when I tried to talk to people about that, I asked them, what could it be? And they said, well, it could not possibly be a Kundalini Awakening because you're too young and you haven't meditated long enough and you have to be initiated by a guru and blah, blah, blah. So I thought, okay, if it's not a near-death experience and it's not a Kundalini Awakening, what are these things that are happening to me? So I began to live a double life. On the outside, I was, a Western medical doctor doing medical practice, got a teaching position at the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. But my in the closet private life, I was a closet mystic and spiritual seeker. And I was meditating, praying regularly. I was researching in various spiritual traditions about spiritual experiences of all types, mystical experiences, psychic phenomena, Kundalini awakenings, near-death experiences, as well as in psychological literature, parapsychology, etc. And over the years, more and more patients started coming, seeing me in my practice. They heard through the grapevine that there was this medical doctor in Toronto that you could go and see. And if you've had some sort of spiritual or paranormal experience, and that I wouldn't automatically think you were crazy. And I was absolutely horrified at the stories I was hearing from people of being mislabeled as being told they were crazy, being sometimes put in hospital, put on, given electroshock treatment, medications, told they're hallucinating, or by their churches being told it was work of the devil. So I learned as I was searching to find an understanding for my own experiences. I think there were two people that had the greatest influence on me. And one was Gopi Krishna. I traveled to India in 1977, and that is where I first met Gopi Krishna. And then he became a mentor to me, and I read all of his books about Kundalini and the yogic model of consciousness. And it was here for the first time that I was able to find a model that encompassed all types of spiritually transformative experiences. The second major influence in my life was the writings of and teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. And I read his classic book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, for the first time in 1988. I've subsequently read, 17 of his books. And his in-depth explanation of the yogic model of consciousness and of spiritually transformative experiences were the best, with Gopi Krishna, were the best explanations I could find for what I was actually experiencing. So in 1990, I finally came out of the closet. I had a very strong experience with, just because of time, I won't be able to share it with you today, but it's what I call my calling mystical experience, where my consciousness became just this beacon of light. And I knew in my soul that I was being called to come out of the closet and to advocate for experiencers and to share publicly now that I too have had a near-death experience, and to those that have the ears to hear that I'd also had a Kundalini awakening and psychic experiences, but I started with the NDE. So in 1990, I came out of the closet after that powerful calling experience. I became the first Canadian medical doctor to specialize my practice in the counseling and research of patients who'd had various types of spiritually transformative experiences. I co-founded the Kundalini Research Network with Dr. Bonnie Greenwell and others. I became the Canadian coordinator for the Spiritual Emergence Network. And I also started writing books about spiritually transformative experiences. So this is my first one, A Farther Shore, which came out in 1994. Then I wrote Farther Shores in 2000. And most recently, you know that I did Touched by the Light. I also was very active in research. This is a copy of the article that was just published in 2020 in Explore magazine. I was the chair of the Kundalini Research Questionnaire Project from 1990 to 1998, all through the 90s. And the results have been published in my books and also in this Explore article. But, you know, life continued on. I had another near-death experience in 1995, which I'm not going to share because of time, but I am going to share with you what happened to me in 2003, which was my 5th near-death experience. So I had 2 as a child, I now realize, one at the age of 5, one at the age of 11. Those were both out-of-body types of near-death experiences when I was close to dead or unconscious. And my adult NDEs, so the one in 79 in the plane crash, the one in 95, and now this one in 2003, they were all mystical types of near-death experiences that had the mystical experience as well as the out-of-body. And what happened in November the 8th, 2003, was I had a slip and fall accident on black ice in Niagara Falls, Canada. I fell back and I hit my head on rock. Nothing broke my fall. I had a serious traumatic brain injury and brain hemorrhage, and I instantly died. And I found my spirit whisked out of my body by a force greater than myself. I was rushed up rapidly through a dark expanse of space. Some people might have called it a tunnel. And I then found myself whisked up to that wonderful white light realm where I'd been in my 1979 near-death experience. This time I was being welcomed into the white light by 2 saints in their light bodies, 2 saints that I recognized immediately. They were saints from my spiritual tradition, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji. And they telepathically welcomed me. The feeling was of great love and of great joy. And they telepathically informed me that I had died, that my work in the body of Dr. Yvonne Kason was finished. And I remember thinking, because I guess my ego mind was still alive a bit, uh-oh, here it comes, because I thought now I was going to have my life review. And I mean, who's had a perfect life? You know, and I was worried about how my life review. And then they just looked at me. It was like they read my thoughts. They could sense my concern. And they just glanced at me. And with a glance, they just blew all of my concern away. And it was like I was instantly given the understanding that the Divine Mother, in its infinite love and infinite wisdom and infinite understanding, understands, just as a loving parent knows that when a child is learning how to walk, it's going to stumble, it's going to fall, it's going to bruise its head, its knees, it's going to make mistakes, that we're all going to make mistakes on our learning journey. And the Divine Mother, Father God, understood this. I entered a place of timeless time, where I was no longer seeing visual images. I was just feeling incredible joy, peace, love, stillness, infinitude, and also past, present, and future seemed to coexist. And I suddenly remembered all of my past lives. You know, it was as if some veil in my consciousness had been removed that was blocking my remembrance of all my past lives, and that veil had been removed. And when I remembered all my past lives, it was like an aha experience, because suddenly my rather unusual incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason, having every STE in the book, made sense. Because guess what? This was not my first incarnation being this way. I'd been a mystic in many incarnations, and I'd had near-death experiences in previous incarnations. So my soul was just really carrying on from my journey in other incarnations. And then after a period of timeless time, I was given a choice. The 2 beings of light, the 2 saints, reappeared, and they telepathically communicated with me that I may now choose whether to incarnate in the body of a baby to further serve the divine, and or to go back to the injured, maimed form. And in that state, in that ecstasy, in that bliss, in that state of communion, it was not my ego mind that responded. It literally felt like it was my heart that responded. My heart was wide open. My ego mind must have been taking a siesta somewhere. And my heart, in this complete sense of trust, complete trust and complete surrender, responded, "Oh, masters, please guide me. What is the higher choice? I want to do God's will." And then telepathically, so lovingly and so gently, like a loving caress, they telepathically communicated to me, "It will be more difficult, but to return." And immediately my heart and soul responded, "I accept." And it was so fast. It was faster than the speed of thought, because it was between the word "I" and the word "accept" that with a gasp of breath, I finally found myself waking up in my previously dead body. But my body was seriously injured. I had had a serious traumatic brain injury, and I was disabled for 12 years following this traumatic brain injury. I did neuro rehab for 7 years, trying to get back to what I used to do. I loved what I did. I loved helping experiencers. I loved giving all sorts of talks and presentations. I loved writing books, but I had to accept that for whatever reason, I was disabled now, and that this was part of the past, and that now how I could serve in my disabled body was with my prayers and meditations. So I took that very seriously, and I worked hard to get back my ability to meditate, because I'd lost it with my traumatic brain injury. And I felt how I could serve now was through prayer and through meditation. But it seems the good Lord had another plan for me, and here I am today. How did I get here? Well, on February 24th, 2016, when I was meditating in the Self-Realization Fellowship Retreat in Encinitas, California, and January 5th, by the way, is Paramahansa Yogananda's birthday, and it's already January 5th in India, so it is his birthday today. I was meditating on one of the holy spots there in Encinitas where he used to meditate and go into samadhi. And I experienced a miracle there. I had a spontaneous brain healing experience. And what I felt was, while I was deep in meditation, I inwardly could see it. I could see it within my inner eye. It was a fountain of liquid light erupted in the center of my brain. And it was literally like the lights came on in the center of my brain that had been in darkness for over 12 years. And what it subjectively felt like was like I woke up, that some part of my brain had woken up after being in a deep sleep for 12 years, and my brain was healed. And I was given the strong inner message, pass on what you have learned, because it was like a computer, my hard drive that had been damaged, that the keyboard had been damaged, but the hard drive was not. So my long-term memory was all intact, but the keyboard, the way to get it out, that had been damaged for 12 years, wasn't able to get it out. I was locked in. But after the brain healing, I started writing again, public speaking, serving on boards, and now I'm president of Spiritual Awakenings International. So now what I'd like to do is shift into the second part of my presentation, where I'm going to be talking to you about spiritually transformative experiences. And I coined this phrase back in 1994 as an umbrella term that I noticed that this wide range of experiences all can cause a spiritual awakening, and they all have similar after effects, physical, psychological, psychic, and spiritual. And what are the types? In all of my books, I have classified them using the yogic model, which I found is most helpful, bridging it with some of our Western terminology. So the one category of STEs are mystical experiences, which in yoga are called samadhis. The second type would be psychic or intuitive experiences called Sdes. The third type of STE is spiritual energy or Kundalini awakenings. The fourth type, near-death experiences. The fifth, other death-related STEs. And finally, inspired creativity and genius. And I'm going to explain all of them a bit more to you. So first, let's start with types of mystical experiences. And as I'm going through these and describing them very briefly, you might do a little checklist of yourself and say, yes, I've had this, I've had this, I've had this. And I think many of you who are experiencers are going to discover as I'm talking that you are actually multiple STE experiencers because you've had many of these experiences. So what are the types of mystical experiences that I classify them in the following way? William James described mystical experiences as that they are beyond words, that they give us sort of a new understanding of the nature of the higher power, of nature of reality, nature of divinity, nature of the universe. That thirdly, that they're passive, they happen to us. Most people cannot make mystical experiences happen, and mystical experiences tend to be transient. Now, that is true, but there are also certain characteristics of various mystical experiences that I categorize them in addition to what William James features that he described. So one is the unitive or the communion experience. And these are types of mystical experiences where one feels oneness. And all of these experiences can be on a spectrum from mild to medium to earth-shattering. So experiences of communion or oneness. So a smaller one might be a feeling of oneness with your lover, or oneness with the scene in nature, or oneness with the tree. And more expansive ones might be feelings of oneness with the entire planet, or oneness with the entire cosmos, or oneness with the power behind the universe. So these are unitive or communion experiences. Another type of mystical experience are ones where the most dramatic feature seems to be the bliss or the joy. And you'll sometimes see images of saints with tears of joy streaming down their cheeks. So that would be what I would call an ecstatic or a bliss type of mystical experience. Then there are other types of mystical experiences that are very visual, have a strong visual component. So these I call the mystical visions. And this can be experiences where people have encounters with a visual experience of perhaps the saint from their tradition or the prophet from their tradition, whether that be Buddha, whether that be Jesus, whether that be Krishna, or it could be angels, it could be visions of realities behind the universe. So these are mystical visions, are mystical experiences that have a really strong visual component. Then there are expansive episodes, another type of mystical experience, but this time where your consciousness expands and where you don't anymore feel like you're the size of your head or body, but you're expanding. You could be larger than your body by a few feet, or you could fill the room, you could fill the auditorium, you could expand so you feel that you're the size of the universe. The next one are the spiritual rebirth, conversion, healing, purification types of experience. And these are the type of experiences where this would be like Paul on the road to Damascus, you that are from the Christian background, that somebody has a profound experience that it totally changes them around from perhaps being an atheist before to an incredible believer. And they can also go through like a purification, a healing, feeling like darkness is being ripped out of them, and then coming out with spiritual renewal. Anyway, this is the type I call the spiritual rebirth type of experience. Then there are those that are revelation or illumination types of mystical experiences. And these are mystical experiences where new knowledge, new information, is the new understanding of the nature of the cosmos, the power behind the cosmos. So that is a revelation or illumination type of mystical experience. And then finally, the dissolution type, and that is when the sense of self seems to completely dissolve. And it can dissolve into, some people describe dissolving into nothingness, and others describe dissolving into everything. The dissolution experience is impossible to describe in words. The next type of spiritually transformative experience is the Kundalini or spiritual energy awakening. And if you look in different spiritual traditions, you'll find they have different names for this. That in yoga, it's called the Kundalini Awakening. In Christianity and Judaism, Holy Spirit, Holy Wind, and Buddhism, Dumo fire. I'm just going to rush a little here. And the classic symptoms with the spiritual energy or Kundalini awakening is energy movement up the spine or body. And it's associated with inner sounds such as a roaring or rushing or the Om sound. And it's often accompanied with light perception. Some people perceive like a liquid light flowing up their spine or flowing up their body. Other people may experience that their body is glowing, with light, or they might feel themselves surrounded by light. Sometimes, to be aware, it can be accompanied by sexual sensations. And sometimes in men, even with a penile erection without any sexual stimulation. The Kundalini awakening, if it is all the way to the crown, because a Kundalini can awaken partially up to one of the lower chakras, or it can rise all the way up to the crown chakra. If it rises all the way to the crown chakra, it usually results in a mystical, profound psychic, or inspired creative experience. And once awakened, the Kundalini energy remains active. It doesn't stop. You're beginning a long-term process. And you may notice repeated rushes of energy up the spine, chakra sensations, inner sounds, light perceptions, and recurrent spiritually transformative experiences. So as I mentioned, it starts a long-term process, but there's also a cleansing that's happening of the ego and psyche. And the long-term goal of a Kundalini awakening is not to have STEs, although that does happen, but it's like a purification happening in body, mind, and spirit, and an expansion of our consciousness to make us clearer and clearer vessels for the divine light until we eventually enter a state of ongoing unitive consciousness, which has been known in different traditions as cosmic consciousness, nirvana, God consciousness, or self-realization. And this is a long haul. May not happen this lifetime, maybe many lifetimes to reach this end point. The next type of STE is various types of psychic intuitive experiences. Just because of time, I'm going to rush through these a little bit. Most of you will probably know what these are: automatic writing, channeling, clairvoyance. That's when you can see things beyond the normal range of thought. Clairsentience, that's where you feel things that other people who don't have this ability are not able to feel. You can feel other person's emotions. If they're hurling negativity at you, you feel it as pain in your body. Clairaudience is when you can hear things beyond the normal range of thought, hearing spirit guides. Healing abilities, out-of-body experiences, mediumships, higher guidance, getting downloads of information, communication with spirit guides, materialization and dematerialization, premonitions or precognition, past life recall. This one, by the way, very, very common. Remote viewing, telekinesis, telepathy, telepyrokinesis. That's when you can start fires with your mind. And transdimensional experiences, including some UFO experiences. So there are more types, and I go into a lot of details and examples in my book, but I just want to give you the list. This is all normal. These are part of spiritual transformation of consciousness that people start developing many of these types of STEs. And I want to state here that mystical experiences are always positive, but psychic experiences are not always spiritual or positive. That some psychic experiences may access lower astral planes. It's understood in yoga and Buddhism that when you get out of our physical plane, there are many layers in the astral planes. The higher astral heavens, where there are more enlightened beings and about our level, and then there are lower astral planes. And that sometimes psychic experiences may access those lower astral planes, and they may be frightening. Or there may be people who are experiencing intrusive psychic phenomena, such as psychic assault by someone who has psychic abilities and is not very ethical, possession states, entities, negative or frightening NDEs, I would say, would be a frightening type of psychic experience, and the phenomenon known as the walk-in. The next category of STE is the inspired creativity and genius. And this is a powerful, inspired, creative experience that is mixed together with the mystical experience. And you know, there have been many cases in history of great mystics, of people who are known as mystics, that also demonstrated tremendous inspired creativity. I mean, Paramahansa Yogananda was one of them, 17 books. Hildegard of Bingen is another example, and she wrote poetry, she composed music, she came up with medicines, she drew art, she was a mystic with tremendous inspired creativity. But then on the other hand, there are geniuses, people we know of as geniuses. When you look in their lives, you discover that they were also having mystical experiences. So an example would be Einstein. Another example would be Brahms. So there's a real connection somehow between inspired creativity and genius. And some people, as multiple STEers, who are getting these downloads, that sometimes the download can also become like a mystical experience. And then it shifts into what I would call inspired creativity. And when I wrote my last two books, I wrote in an inspired creative state. It was like I was in a mystical experience most of the time when I was writing, and phenomenal inspired creativity. Near-death experiences is the next category. Because you're very familiar with this, I'm going to go over this very briefly, very quickly, so that we'll have time for questions. So a near-death experience is an out-of-body and or white light mystical experience. And it happens when a person is close to death, clinically dead, or facing imminent death or severe trauma. That is the current definition. So if this happens to you, if you have an NDE-like experience when you're meditating, it's not a near-death experience. It might be an out-of-body experience, or it might be a mystical experience, or it might be a Kundalini Awakening. We only call it a near-death experience if it happens to you when you're close to death, clinically dead, and then resuscitated, or facing imminent death or severe trauma. Raymond Moody defined the features of a near-death experience. I think your group is quite familiar, and because I'm running late, I'm going to just say most near-death experiences have about 7 of the 15 features that Raymond Moody talks about. And there are 3 main types of near-death experiences I want all of you to be aware of. And one is the out-of-body type experience. And you've heard this, the out-of-body near-death experience, where the person is floating above their body and they're watching the doctors with the crash cart trying to resuscitate them. So that is the one type of near-death experience. The second type, which in the research field is called the deeper type of near-death experience, it might start with an out-of-body experience, but then it moves into the mystical experience, the white light experience, where they see beings of light. They might have a life review. They experience the higher power and the love of the higher power. And it is the mystical type of near-death experience that is by far the most transforming and life-changing, most impactful. And then the third category, we mustn't forget them, is the distressing near-death experience. The next type of STE is the other death-related STEs, and there are 3 main types. One are the deathbed visions. So these are things that happen, STEs that happen to people shortly before they actually die. So with days or weeks before they actually die. It's called many names, sometimes end-of-life experiences, sometimes nearing death awareness. I'm using the term deathbed visions. Then there's the death watch experience, which happens at the time that somebody else dies. Some people call this a shared death experience. And then there are after-death communications when it seems the spirit of somebody who died days, weeks, months, or years ago is striving to communicate with the living. Now, the death watch experience, I'm just going to tell you very briefly, I found this to be a very common type of STE. I coined this term death watch experience back in 2000. And it occurs to you at the time that somebody else dies at their moment of death. And it is more likely to happen to you if you are close to that person. So meaning if you are physically close to them at their bedside, or if you're emotionally close to them. So if it's somebody that you love, you can have a death watch experience at the moment of death, even if they're dying on the other end of the planet. And there are many types of death watch experiences, and I give examples of all of them in my book, but just to run through them quickly with you, because I bet many of you have had these experiences. There's the first one that's NDE-like, which is what I call the shared death experience. And this would be like, so you're at the bedside. One of my stories in my book, a woman told me she was at the bedside of her husband when he died. And at his moment of death, she found herself popped out of body, and she was out of body with her husband. And they were both going up this tunnel. They were both going towards the light together. Then all of a sudden it was like she stopped and he kept going into the light, and then boom, she was back in her body at her bedside, and her husband had passed. The next type of death watch experience is the body symptom type. And this is where you might get the physical symptoms that the person you love has at their moment of death. For example, you might develop crushing chest pain and shortness of breath right at the moment that your loved one is dying of a heart attack with crushing chest pain and shortness of breath. And then it goes away after their moment of death. Death watch visions, very, very common. This could be that you're at the bedside of your loved one and you see at their moment of death, you might see an orb of light leave their body, or you might see their spirit leave their body, or you might visually see like an angel or a being waiting for them to accompany them to leave the body, or you might see them enter into the light. That happened to me when my mom died. Or you could be at far away. This happened when my grandfather died, where all of a sudden I was sleeping, my grandfather's face popped into my mind, and I woke up and I just knew that my grandfather had died. And sure enough, I got the phone call shortly afterwards. Somebody else told me he was driving to visit his dying mother in the hospital, and all of a sudden he could see her face in the rearview mirror of the car. And he just knew intuitively that she had passed. And sure enough, he found out she had passed right at the moment he had that vision of her face in the mirror. Auditory death watch experiences is when you hear in your mind the voice of the dying loved one giving you a message. The next type, I call it the brushed by an angel type of death watch experience. And that is at the moment of death, where you get catapulted into a mystical experience, as if an angel that was at your loved one's bedside brushed you when they carried your loved one's spirit over. And this can also happen when you're if you have the great pleasure at being at the bedside of an advanced saint at their moment of death, that people have described to me that there was like a spiritual force field and everyone in the room was catapulted into a mystical experience at the moment of the saint's death. And then the last one, which is much more common than you would imagine, I call it the ushering death watch experience. And this is when people all of a sudden find themselves popped out of body and they're with a spirit that has just passed, and they intuitively know that they're being called by spirit to help usher that soul into the light. So I'm now going to start wrapping up. After your first awakening spiritually transformative experiences, many people become multiple STE experiencers. They might have repeated STs of the same type that their first one was, but many start having different types of STEs as well, and repeated and ongoing STEs, so that this just becomes a part of your life, that you're having repeated different types of STEs. There are many physical after effects that one have with spiritually transformative experiences. I'm just aware that I'm running over time, so I'm going to skip over this, but I'm just going to mention one thing here is the new sensitivities that people tend to develop after all types of STEs, which would be food sensitivities, sound sensitivities, electromagnetic field sensitivities. And this is a two-way thing, that you might be sensitive to the electromagnetic fields around you. Other people are not aware of it, but you actually feel physical discomfort from like lasers and electromagnetic fields. Another is that your aura seems to disrupt electromagnetic fields around you, that you might find that your energy makes the microwave go off, it makes wristwatches stop working, coins in your pocket don't work in payphones, back in the way of payphones. You might make the computer fritz out, you might make light bulbs pop, you might make microphones stop working. I went through a real phase of making light bulbs pop all the time. Other people, they walk down the street and the light bulbs start flickering in the street lamps. The psychological after effects of STEs, it's like an inner light is now shining in your psychological house, and it's revealing the inner cobwebs. And people who've had their awakening STE, they embrace their emotional recovery and healing work. They realize, I've got to start doing my inner work, purifying my inner house. But a second thing starts happening after your spiritual awakening is what in the mystical literature is called purgation, which means that spirit makes stuff surface to your consciousness, whether you like it or not. Repressed memories, repressed wounds will spontaneously surface. And it's like spirit is saying to you, it's time to heal this. It's time to deal with this. And also past life memories may surface because it's time to heal the wounds we're still carrying from past life memories. People will often, after their awakening, finally embrace abandoning self-destructive habits, whether it be smoking or drugs or alcohol. They may reevaluate jobs and relationships, and they also often have a stronger sense of life purpose. And of course, the spiritual after effects may be obvious: increased spiritual focus, more spiritual searching. Many go on a spiritual quest and start trying out all sorts of spiritual paths and spiritual teachings and study with different teachers. They find they need more time for prayer, more time for meditation, more time for spiritual study, that they have a desire or a necessity to live a moral life. They might find that their whole nervous system cannot tolerate it if they try to, for example, do something unethical, that their heart is opening, they become more loving, they become more forgiving. But they also tend to become more loving to themselves and set healthier boundaries and realize that being a doormat is not what being spiritual is. We must love ourselves, expect ourselves to be treated with respect, just as we are loving others and are striving to treat others with respect. People become more humble, less selfish, less materialistic, and become much more spiritual and often less religious, less dogmatic views. But there can be challenging effects too. And I want to mention this before we close, that many people after their spiritual awakening, whatever type of STE they had first, they may have difficulties with relationships because they're changing. Their perspectives are changing. They're not the same person they were before. They themselves may experience confusion or anxiety, particularly if they don't have names for the experience. They don't know what's happening to them. They might be afraid of being labeled crazy. They might actually be afraid that they are crazy. And they might also have to deal with the fact that people are labeling them as crazy. If they don't understand the physical side, after effects, they may wonder about that. And some people feel a lot of sadness or even anger that they're not in that bliss state when they have to come back to the trauma, abuse, challenges of everyday life, because guess what? We all do. So how can we best support STE experiencers? Number one is listen. Let people tell their stories. listen to them in a supportive way, validate their STEs. These are real. They are not hallucinations. They're happening to other people. Help people find a non-pathological name. For example, at our Spiritual Awakenings International website, I outline all of those types of STEs and give descriptions so people can go, oh, that's called clairsentience, or oh, that's called clairvoyance. So they'll have a non-pathological name. And then you can refer them to support. We have wonderful sharing circles at Spiritual Awakenings International, and I know that Shaun does as well with Hawaiian IANDS. So in conclusion, what have I learned in my 40 years of research? Well, that near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences are very real. They are not hallucinations. After the original awakening experience, most people start having multiple spiritually transformative experiences. And what before the awakening was considered paranormal becomes the new normal for experiencers. And finally, that meditation and love are the two keys to progress on the spiritual path. Love, where we progressively open and purify our heart, and meditation to expand our consciousness, which enables us to have STEs and ultimately to reach a state of communion. So everything I talked about today, you can read more in my book if you're interested. And I invite all of you to check out Spiritual Awakenings International. That is our website there. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Everybody is, I put the link to our YouTube channel in here because it's such a wealth of information that you provided. We could keep you here all night for the next few days because I'm just amazed. I have a few friends here. After my NDE, people didn't understand. A lot of people didn't understand why I wanted to talk with other experiencers, and I didn't understand. And so some friends of mine that are here, and they're also SRFers, by the way, we started this little NDE group. And I just loved hearing, what you were saying, because it's so important for people that have had these experiences to have a safe place to share. As you know, and many people here in the group know, people think we're crazy and whatever. And so I'm just really grateful for you and Robert and SAI, and that you're providing this space for people to come and share. And I just want to remind everybody the groups are all free and they're really nice. And you can see more of Yvonne there. So with that, if you'd like to put your chats in the question, your questions in the chat, and we'll go through and see what Dr. Yvonne would like to answer. So when somebody said, are STEs considered separate or mutually exclusive from NDEs? That goes along with a couple of other questions that I had. People can have NDEs but not have an STE, correct? Or
no.
No. Okay.
No. Okay. So let me answer that question. Is that NDEs, so I was rushing through that part, are one type of STE. So near-death experiences are one type of spiritually transformative experience. So imagine it's like a big umbrella, spiritually transformative experiences, and near-death experiences are one subtype. Okay, then mystical experiences are another subtype, and psychic experiences, intuitive experiences, another subtype, Kundalini Awakening, another subtype. They're all connected, they all overlap, because they all have to do with this expansion of consciousness that in the yogic tradition is understood that all of us will eventually experience with our spiritual awakening. And so it's just a matter of your focus. Like I personally was the co-founder of the Kundalini Research Network, and we founded that in 1990. And we did a lot of study of Kundalini and how it related to spiritually transformative experiences. There are other groups such as NDEs and IANDS that they chose to focus on the near-death experience. So that's another type of experience. There are other groups out there, like say the Monroe Institute, for example, just to give an example, that focused on psychic phenomenon. And then there are other groups out there that were looking at mystical experiences. So one of the reasons that I coined the phrase spiritually transformative experiences, and also with Robert co-founded Spiritual Awakenings International, was rather than just looking at one type of experience, or another one's UFOs. Okay, there was other groups that are just looking at UFO phenomena, but they're all connected. And so in all my career, I've always been seeing that they're connected and that people start having all types of experiences. So that's what Spiritual Awakenings is all about. All of these experiences fit under the umbrella. Nobody is excluded. They all count. They're all types of spiritually transformative experiences.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what about NDE lights, or is that such a thing? Some people have talked about NDE lights. Is that a thing?
NDE-like experiences?
Yeah.
So that's an STE again, that because people were only looking at the near-death experience, they didn't realize, oh, there's mystical experiences. Oh, there's Kundalini Awakening. Oh, there's out-of-body experiences. So once you break down your walls, somebody once called it stovepipe vision. I thought it was so cute that people were so busy looking down their stovepipe that they didn't see what was happening down the other stovepipes. And that's what I really liked about the yogic model of consciousness. And it's in Buddhism as well. But there's this classic book, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras in Yoga. And it was written, I don't know how many thousand years ago, but it's got all of this in there. It's all in there already. All of the psychic phenomenon, all the types of mystical experiences, Kundalini Awakening, everything. It's all in there, and it's just understood that these are things that are within the potential for human consciousness as it is growing and unfolding. And so spiritually transformative experiences, that's just the umbrella term that I came up with for Western society to understand what, in fact, the yogis have known about for thousands of years.
So somebody had a question about what it was like in the 70s.
What was it like in the 70s? It was horrible. It was horrible. It was a total invalidation. Total invalidation that when I tried to speak to my medical doctor friends about what happened in the plane crash, everyone dismissed it as, oh, it's a hallucination because of a low blood sugar, or a hallucination because of an electrolyte imbalance. I mean, at least they knew I wasn't crazy, but everybody sort of dismissed it as a hallucination. And then I mentioned that I went to the so-called near-death expert, he self-proclaimed, obviously was not, who told me clearly it was not a near-death experience because I didn't see a tunnel and I wasn't dead. And of course, back in the 70s, that is what they thought. Things have changed over the years. And similarly, the Kundalini so-called experts I spoke to said couldn't possibly be a Kundalini awakening. That only happens if you're initiated with a guru. But I can now say, 40 years later, yeah, maybe that's true, but who's to say I wasn't initiated by a guru maybe 10 lifetimes ago, or last lifetime? So we have to think of a multi-lifetime perspective. So now I'm very confident to say that that plane crash experience was a near-death experience, and that was in the 70s, and that meditation experience was a Kundalini awakening. But there was absolutely no supportive validation. And that's part of what has propelled me to become an advocate for experiencers, and also to provide a safe place where experiencers could share, because I had none of that, for most of my life.
Yeah, and in fact, back when Yogananda back then it was guru to disciple, right? So if you have an awakening, you better hope you have a guru who's going to help you with it. So Diane, who's also from Toronto, and she attended U of T, she wants to know about the lake. So when you were rescued from the lake, by the way, what was the temperature of the lake? Was it
a sub-zero?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was.
Wait a second. She
lake,
wanted to know, were you underwater?
It was Lake of the Woods by Kenora. And I went underwater several times and had lake water in my lungs, but I managed to swim up to surface again. And through the grace of God and superhuman strength, I did manage to swim to shore. So actually, when the helicopter pilots rescued us, the pilot and I had swum to shore.
Wow. How far did you swim?
They estimate just from where the plane went down and where they rescued us that I swum about 200 yards. And this was in ice cold water with a strong current, wearing a heavy winter coat and boots. So it was, people say it was literally impossible. I just look at it as the grace of God. Whoever's raised your hand, please write your question in the chat. That's how we're handling the questions today. Mm-hmm.
Somebody wants to know what yogis call STEs.
I said earlier on, they use the word samadhi for mystical experiences of all types. And they use the word siddhi, S-I-D-D-H-I, siddhi, for psychic and intuitive experiences of all types. And the spiritual energy, they use the word kundalini. So in yoga, we would talk about a near-death experience as being either a samadhi experience that happened when you were close to death, or a siddhi experience that happened when you're close to death.
Okay, so this is, you already did kind of answer this, but we'll do it again. So somebody wants to know, what is your go-to methods to get close to spirit? Do you practice or believe in manifestations?
Okay, so over the years, I explored many different paths, and I learned from many different teachers and many different traditions. But I finally found the shoe that fit in 2000. And I realized that for me, my personal path, that I had some profound experiences. I actually talk about it in my book, a mystical experience I had when I was in Israel in 2000, where I had a strong experience of Jesus. And I realized that I've been a Christian for 2,000 years, but I, for many years, have had visions of Babaji from the Yogananda tradition. So I knew I was a yogi, and something healed in me when I was in India. And I realized, I get it. I'm a Christian yogi. They've both been my gurus in past lifetimes, Babaji and Jesus. And the lineage that has both Babaji and Jesus in it in the West today is Self-Realization Fellowship that Paramahansa Yogananda brought to the West. So I'm an SRFer, and I practice Kriya Yoga, and I've been doing that devotedly for 22 years now.
Okay, so somebody would like to know, did you have trauma and PTSD? That's kind of self-evident, but they wanted to know.
No, it's not self-evident, and I will answer it. Okay, so.
Well, no, the question was, did you have trauma, but then how did you deal with it?
Okay, so I will say that relating to my 2003 death-type near-death experience, that I told you I died, and I sustained a very serious traumatic brain injury. And yes, I had a powerful, mystical, white light near-death experience. That is true. But also, in addition, and at the same time, when I came back in my body, I did have post-traumatic stress related to the physical injury that my body experienced. And if my foot touched even a little bit of ice, I live in Canada, so it's icy in the winter, right? I would have a panic attack. Like literally, I would freeze. I would go into a panic attack. I'd feel incredible anxiety. It was like a body reaction. I am not afraid of death. I, in fact, welcome death. It's much nicer on the other side than here. So this was something completely different. This was like, it was like my body had the memory and my body had the post-traumatic stress from the reaction to that injury. My body was trying to protect me from being injured again. And, you know, nightmares and flashbacks and other symptoms that one gets from post-traumatic stress. So I'm really glad you asked this question, because I think it's something that's not talked about near enough, that one can have both post-traumatic stress from the physical injury that you sustained that killed you or almost killed you, and the profound spiritual blessing and like safety ring of knowing that you are loved by the other side and that you're an infinite soul and that your soul lives on. So it is absolutely possible to have both at the same time. It's like, can you have a broken leg and at the same time be eating, you know, your favorite kind of pie? Well, yes, of course, you can have both of them at the same time. So that is what happened to me with the traumatic brain injury. And I actually found that, you know, I got really, really great psychological help. I got really great physical help. But I found for me, the post-traumatic stress, it really took time. That it really was time was the healer. I did not have to go for specific therapy for the post-traumatic stress, but it was really quite marked, I would say, for the first 3 months at least, perhaps 6. That I had post-traumatic stress symptoms quite definitely.
Okay, so I think you mentioned this, but we'll do it. Do you have any ideas or techniques to help open the third eye more fully and expansively?
Well, we have to open up every part of our system. And what I would recommend is that you find a spiritual path that resonates with your soul. And everybody's different. Just, you know, I explored many different paths until I found the path that fit for me. And what I recommend is, rather than me telling you, you know, what techniques I use that work for me, is for me to suggest to you that you seek out those spiritual paths, a spiritual path that resonates with your soul. And when you find the path that resonates with your soul, is then to follow that tradition deeply. You know, rather than sampling. Once you find the one that fits, once you find the path that fits, that follow that deeply. But the bottom line is prayer, meditation, doing your inner work, striving to live according to the universal spiritual principles, that all of that will help you to speed your spiritual transformation process. And as part of that process, the third eye begins to open.
I think to recap, because I'm getting some of the same questions over again. So this person's asking, what percentage of NDEs actually have any type of STE? So,
okay, all of them, all of them. So some people seem to be a little bit mixed up. Near-death experiences are one type of STE. And actually, there are a lot of STEs, way more people having other STEs than they are having NDEs. In my clinical practice, it was only about 10% of the people that came to see me were having near-death experiences. So it's a subtype. Okay, it's like it's one type of STE, but there are so many people having other types of STEs. And we just have to embrace that it's part of a family, like, it's one child in the family.
Did you experience any childhood STE experiences? And if so, did they have an effect on your development and interaction with others?
Yeah. Thank you, Robert, for that question. I saw that he popped it into the chat. Well, my first childhood STE that I have memory for was actually a near-death experience that happened when I was 5 years old. I was at a train platform, and I was almost hit by a train. And fortunately, somebody pulled me out from in front of the train before it could hit me. But right before the train was about to hit, I went out of body and time stood still. And I entered this incredible state of peace. And I could see that I was about to be hit by a train. I was about to be killed, but I was totally unafraid. So I was 5 years old. But then I was pulled, and suddenly the time started moving again, and I was on the platform and I was not hit by the train. Now, I never realized that was a type of near-death experience until many years later, till a few years ago. But now I realize that was my first near-death experience, an out-of-body type. The impact it had on me when I was 5 years old, I didn't know it was paranormal. I thought I could fly. And that's how I understood it as a 5-year-old, is that I had flown that day. And I remember trying to fly afterwards, climbing up on the fence in front of my house, spreading out my arms, trying to fly down the street. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't do that. And that was how I understood it as a 5-year-old. My next clear STE as a child also happened as a near-death experience. When I was 11 years old, my family was in a really bad car accident, and I had a head injury, and I was unconscious for 3 days. I was in a coma for 3 days. And I've always remembered floating above my unconscious body and watching the accident scene, and floating above in the emergency room when the doctors were trying to resuscitate me, and seeing my little body. I was, I just turned 11, so I was still a kid. It was way before puberty, and I'm lying there on this I still remember the outfit I was wearing and everything. And I'm up above, maybe 15, 20 feet above, looking down. And I remember very clearly when I regained consciousness 3 days later. And interesting, again, as an 11-year-old, I had no idea that was paranormal. For all I knew, that's what everyone experienced when they were unconscious for a few days because of an accident. But what I now realize is I had very marked after effects from that near-death experience. I now know it was a near-death experience, which was that for almost a year afterwards, I could see ghosts. And I thought my house was haunted. That's how I understood it as a child. And I refused to sleep in my bedroom, and I made my parents move in my bed into the bedroom where my younger brother and sister were sleeping, because I was afraid to be in my bedroom at night because I was seeing all of these spirits in my bedroom. And, my parents dismissed it as, stress from the car accident or whatever they thought. But I now realize many years later, and as a researcher, that was actually an after effect from my childhood NDE. So I had that STE, that ability to see ghosts, as an after effect of the STE, which was the near-death experience that I had. So yes, I think it might have made me more open to that there's more to consciousness than I realized. But, as a child, you have no way of measuring what's normal, what's paranormal. So it was normal for me. It's just what I experienced. It's only now, many, many, many years later, that I can say, oh dear, I started having STs when I was a child.
Yeah, that's actually nice when the pieces of the puzzle start coming together and making sense. Okay, so can you talk about the fact that all individuals have different combinations of experiences, and that communion may preview STEs? Do you understand that?
Yes. So communion is a type of STE. So it's not that communion is previewing the STE, it's that maybe one of your first STEs was a mystical experience of communion. And usually what happens in my clinical experience and from my studying of the mystical literature is that people begin on the mystical path having intermittent experiences. So let's imagine that the communion experience was your first, a communion mystical experience. That might be your awakening experience, this particular incarnation, a communion type of mystical experience. Usually that's temporary. It may last minutes. It may last hours. Very rarely, it may last days. I've heard some where it's even lasted months. But generally, then it's like your karma catches up with you or something. You're not able, unless you're a very advanced saint, you're not able to sustain that. And then then your consciousness contracts again. And then you have to work at trying to achieve that state of consciousness again and to sustain it for a longer and longer period of time. And that involves embracing your spiritual practices, as I said before, prayer and meditation, striving to live a moral lifestyle following the universal spiritual laws, but also doing your inner psychological work. And we've all got inner psychological work to do, if not from this lifetime, from past lifetimes. And they'll start being brought to your attention if you're not aware of it. Now, oops, okay. And if you have some karma with somebody that needs to be worked out, oh, the good Lord will find a way for you guys to meet. and so that you'll be forced to realize this is an area within yourself that still needs a little bit of growth, a purification, or we need to learn to rise above it in our spiritual practices. So we can get teasers in our life too. I didn't talk about my 1995 mystical experience because I didn't have time today. It was my near-death experience in a near-miss accident in 1995. But afterwards, I went into a state of communion for 2 months. And it was incredible. I was home. It was what the mystical texts write about 24/7. I was in that state of oneness. I didn't talk about it at all. I didn't tell anybody because it was really like what they say in yoga: before enlightenment, chopping wood and hauling water; after enlightenment, chopping wood and hauling water. So I just continued my life as normal, didn't tell anybody. I was just in this profound state of mystical communion at all times. But with time, I found it became more difficult to sustain it. My consciousness started contracting, and I would have to meditate and put my focus here in order to pop back into that expansive state of union. And then finally, after 2 months, I was not able to get back into that state of union. And how I understand it, have come to understand it, is my karma caught up with me, and that I was given a taste of something that was possible, like a teaser, right? And then Spirit said, and now you're going to have to work for it. So in fact, I've been working for it ever since.
That's so beautiful. Because so many NDEs, including myself, like we think that's the end, and then we realize, no, that's just the beginning.
That was the teaser.
And I had yeah, and the funny thing about the dark, I mean, for me it was a dark night, that that disconnection period. And it's like, I think Adyashanti calls it, I got it, I lost it, because that's what was happening with me. I was like, oh my gosh. So that is really great what you said. Somebody would like to know, how do you envision SDEs contributing to human evolution and physiology?
All right. So again, I'm going to draw from the yogic tradition because I have found the best explanation there. And I'm going to sort of try and overlap it with a little bit of what we understand in terms of Western medical science. So you know how they always say that we're only using like 10% of our brain, right? And there's 90% of our brain that we're not using. So you wonder like, if there's some intelligent plan, why would we have 90% of wasted space between our ears? It doesn't make any sense at all, does it? So in yoga, they often will depict the crown chakra or the brain as a 1,000-petaled lotus. And some of you may have seen this image of the 1,000-petaled lotus for the crown chakra for the brain. So one way of understanding it, overlapping it with our understanding, our Western understanding of the brain, and I've seen it explained this way in yoga, is that each petal of this 1,000-petaled lotus is a capacity or ability that the brain might have. So that one of these petals might be the ability to remember past lives. Another one of these petals might be clairvoyance. Another one of these petals might be healing abilities. Another one of these petals might be mediumship abilities. Another one of these petals might be transdimensional, being able to travel transdimensionally. Another one might be out-of-body experiences. I don't know which one I've mentioned, which one I have. Another one might be inspired creativity. Another one might be the ability to have mystical communion experiences. Another one might be mystical vision. So that there are many potential capabilities within the human brain that are not open yet. And as the 1,000-petal lotus is opening with our spiritual awakening, petal after petal after petal after petal, that we are actually expanding what our normal range of consciousness is. So, you know, it might be a little beep, beep, you know, an out-of-body experience and it closes again, but that petal doesn't close all the way. And then you find, oh, now it opens and I'm able to have repeated out-of-body experiences. Or similarly, your mystical experience. And then it closes part way, but we find it's easier to open until it's open and we start having repeated mystical experiences in our meditation. So it's like an unfolding of the many petals of the 1,000-petal lotus of the crown, which is the metaphor that they use in yoga, could be from a Western perspective that we are turning on some of these unused capacities in our brain, that they're being activated, so that instead of only using 10%, we're now going to be using 12% or 15% or 20% or 30% of the potentiality in our brain. And Gopi Krishna, and actually in the yogic tradition, it's quite widespread, that this is part of the evolution of the human species, that we are all evolving very, very slowly over many lifetimes, and that we just happen to be coming out of the dark ages, or what's called the Kali Yuga, the dark ages, which is the least enlightened time, where we're using the smallest portion of our brain, smallest part, that we're now on an upwards yuga. So this is the time of awakening. So we are in a time in history that this is a time of awakening. Many people are awakening to their true spiritual nature, that we're more than just physical beings. And as people are having spiritual awakening, some of these perhaps dormant petals or dormant capacities in the brain are starting to awaken. And then it's becoming a part of your normal being. And I would compare this to color vision, you know, that you're now starting to be able to perceive more colors than you could before. And it's just now, it's the new normal for you. So that's why I called it what used to be before the spiritual awakening paranormal becomes the new normal. And everyone's unfolding in a slightly different way. And we all have to cleanse whatever our issues are. They say that if we have past life issues, they're like little residues on the petals, right? That they could be held in the petals of the chakras, or they could be held in the petals in the brain. So we have to clean off those little residues, those psychological and ego issues, past life issues, so that the petals can truly open and that we can become clear vessels of the divine light that wants to express through us.
How are you doing on energy?
I'm okay.
Okay, good. Because we have some really good questions and your answers are amazing. So somebody says, you mentioned that the understanding from your SDEs that there's only love. Please share your understanding in regards to the lower astral beings that have negative vibrations.
Okay. I don't think I said there is only love. So if that came out of my mouth, I apologize for that, because I do not experience that to be true. I think the nature of the infinite higher power is infinite unconditional love. I did say that the higher power behind the universe is profound unconditional love with profound wisdom, compassion, understanding, intelligence, all of the above. However, we live in a dualistic reality. You know that in the Chinese, they have the yin and the yang, the white and the black. And that if there was just light, undifferentiated light, there would be no contrast. You know, all you would see is light. So it'd be like, that's all you see is light and love. But that is not the plane of consciousness that we are living in. We are living in a plane that is dualistic. In yoga, it's called Maya or delusion. It's the dream created by the source. But in this dream that we live in, that we experience as reality, there is definitely darkness and there is light. Okay. And on the astral planes, there are many layers in the astral planes. And think of it like all the grades in school that you have to go to. I mean, you don't go into school and all of a sudden you're a university graduate with a PhD. No, you start with kindergarten. You have to learn whatever you learn in kindergarten. Then if you learn those lessons, you go to grade 1. And then if you learn those lessons, you go to grade 2. And maybe you get stuck in grade 2 for 2 years because you can't master the math or something, right? And then you finally make it to grade 3. That similarly, according to yoga, that we're all learning incarnation after incarnation after incarnation, like schools of life, and that there are many, many levels of learning. You know, that I talked about math, but there's also moral learning, moral lessons, and there are people that are at lower stages in their learning, or they might even regress into what we typically call evil or darkness. I mean, I'm not trying to scare people. It's part of the spectrum, you know, of as we leave our physical body, just as on Earth, you know, you go into a big crowded city and everybody you meet is not a saint. They aren't behaving like a saint. Maybe they have the potential within their soul to one day grow and evolve to the point where they will be expressing that hidden saint, which is within their soul, because everyone's got that potential within them. But in terms of where they're at right now, you know, they might be a criminal, they might be a drug addict, they might be a sociopath. I mean, you don't know that there's this whole spectrum that for whatever reason in the divine plan, this is the way it is on our planet right now, that there's a tremendous spectrum. And the thing is, not for us to judge, but for us to develop discernment and wisdom and to learn our own spiritual lessons in this environment that has so many levels of awakeness or asleepness in it. And similarly, on the astral planes, there are many levels when we leave. So it doesn't make any sense that somebody who's on a very dark level of consciousness, it's like attract likes. They will go to a similar vibration when they're on the other side until karmically it's they're drawn by the intelligence behind the universe. That's my understanding, to an incarnation, whether it be here or on some other planet or other dimensions, where their soul will have exactly those experiences that their soul needs in order to learn and grow and evolve.
Great. So this is going to be a combined question from some multi-experience. First part is, why do you think you had so many in one lifetime? And then many of us experiencers have feelings of guilt or unworthiness, like why did we have all these experiences? And so so the person is asking, that they feel unworthy of having all of these experiences. What is your advice for somebody struggling with that?
That's an interesting question. My heart goes to you, whoever it is that you're struggling with this sense of unworthiness. Everybody is worthy. Everyone is deserving of divine love, and everyone is deserving of spiritual awakening. So I really hope that you can embrace that part of you that feels unworthiness and just really love it, like a wounded inner child part of you, and just keep telling that wounded part of you that everyone deserves to be loved. Everyone deserves a glimpse of the light. Everyone deserves to feel divine love. Everyone does. And it's not ego inflating. In fact, it's the opposite. That in my own experience, my most profound mystical experiences have been the most humbling. When I told you that for 2 months I was in this unitive state of consciousness in 1995, it was an incredibly humbling experience, because when you're not in it, it might seem paradoxical. But when I was actually in that state of oneness, I was so acutely aware, I was totally aware that every sentient being was equally connected to the source, the same as I was, that we were all equally connected, like rays of sun. You don't have some rays of the sun that are more connected to the sun than the other. No, they're all equally connected to the sun. You're equally connected to the source. But what I was aware of, and I could see, feel, perceive, knew in that state of oneness, was that most sentient beings have like a veil on their consciousness, so that they're just not able to perceive it. They don't feel it and see it. The only thing that had happened to me was that veil had been removed. And so I was living it, feeling, experiencing, knowing that all of us, not just me, all of us are equally connected to that source. So yeah, we're all deserving. And who gets more peaks and who gets more teasers and who gets less? Somebody says, why do you have so many? I don't know. Divine plan, I guess. I sometimes laugh and joke and say, the good Lord wanted me to be sure that I knew what my medical specialty was going to be. So every few years he kept popping in some more experiences. It's the divine plan, not my plan. But I think that also it was because I was being called to help others. And by me having so many of these experiences, I could relate on a feeling level, experientially, knowing what people were telling me about. Like, I know what it's like to have nobody to validate you, because I lived that for many, many, many years. So I absolutely know what that's like. And when people are highly clairsentient and they're picking up on other people's emotions, oh, I know what that's like. Because I live that way too. And so it's given me a much, much greater compassion and a much greater ability to be there for other people. And it's given me the ability to write these books and give these talks that hopefully will help other people realize you're not crazy. It's real. It's part of the spiritual awakening process that's happening, I believe, to everybody to some degree. And somebody has to be at the crest of the wave. So if we're at the crest of the wave, we're some of the first people having awakenings at this time in history, so be it. But, you know, there have been people having spiritual awakenings throughout history in all cultures and all societies. There's been mystics, there's been shamans, there's been prophets. These are people that were having STEs.
And that's why we need to treat the trauma and the PTSD. That goes to the feelings of unworthiness. So we don't want to spiritually bypass, correct?
Right.
You know, doing therapy, you know, to deal with the trauma first, because if we're in like trauma brain, we can't really connect to our higher source.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I was very blessed. I had really excellent medical, psychological, spiritual support after my traumatic brain injury. But if people don't have that and you are experiencing some woundedness, I would really encourage you to not be afraid to reach out and get some professional support. And they don't even have to know squat about STEs. They can just help you with the trauma part of it. If you can't find somebody who's knowledgeable about spiritual awakenings. I mean, if you can find someone knowledgeable, that's great. But if not, you know, a trained counselor who specializes in post-traumatic stress, I really would advocate that. Or recovery, if you have to deal with some recovery issues, or whatever it is, childhood abuse.
So somebody would like to know, can you say a few words about UFOs and beings associated with mystical experiences?
UFOs, okay, and beings associated with what?
Yeah, so UFOs and interdimensional beings and how they might play a role in mystical experiences. Okay. Or any.
All right. So first off, I would like to say that I think those are quite different experiences. Right. So let's start that as point one. It has been my observation going back over 30 years, 35 years, that many of the UFO so-called abductions, what used to be called abductions, now they're starting to use some different vocabulary. They call them encounters, I believe, are trans-dimensional psychic experiences. So that these beings either are existing on dimensions different from our own, or are able to sort of travel interdimensionally, you know, sort of like Star Trek, where they use a beam me up, Scotty, and they go from one place to the other. That either way, the impact on people who've had these UFO encounters demonstrate the same sort of patterns as people who had very strong psychic awakenings. So it seems like the psychic center in their consciousness, psychic centers in their consciousness have been awakened by this experience that they perceive as a UFO abduction. So, you know, if you have a mystical experience, it makes you more susceptible to other mystical experiences. If you have psychic experiences, it makes you more susceptible to other psychic experiences. So, you know, I observed from early on, well, why would a UFO encounter, if it's here on this three-dimensional plane, why is it suddenly making you open to psychic phenomenon and out-of-body experiences? That it would seem to me that maybe that's because that experience involved perhaps an out-of-body experience, trans-dimensional experience. So I've been writing that in my books since 1994, and actually now Ray Hernandez and the Conscious Connection Research Institute, I don't think I got the name completely right, but they've been doing a lot of work on UFO encounters. And that's their conclusion too, that there are trans-dimensional experiences happening in consciousness that tends to open people's consciousness to other sorts of psychic phenomenon. But they're finding that sometimes opening them up to mystical phenomenon too. And that that there seem to be many types of beings that are psychically or telepathically communicating with people, and that I think in the past, everyone who talked about this sort of experience was automatically labeled as crazy, and so they were afraid to talk about it. But now, with STEs coming out, people are feeling safe enough to share what's happening to them. And they, just like people now, we're beginning to accept that you might be able to communicate with spirit guides. We might be able to have mediumistic experiences with spirits who have departed, that it's becoming more acceptable that why can't we have transdimensional communication with beings and entities that maybe are living on other dimensions, or maybe they're on our dimension but far away and able to communicate transdimensionally. So it's all connected to understanding our growing understanding of the potential of human consciousness being much broader than we thought before. And that's part of what STEs allows us to do. It's a very broad understanding, but a mystical experience, that is different. Mystical experiences are when we access the highest astral planes or the heavenly astral planes and the causal planes, which is an even more subtle, more highly refined plane, which is beyond today's conversation.
Yeah, and I want to remind everyone, if you go to Spiritual Awakenings International, Yvonne has really written up all of the different experiences and explains it really well. So go to the website, spend some time. She's got lots of videos on there. One final thing, so we have many people with traumatic brain injuries. I'm not sure if everybody heard that you had a traumatic brain injury, that you were disabled for 12 years, right?
Yeah.
For 12 years.
12 years, over 12 years.
And that you held yourself. So I think if you could talk about that, that would be a wonderful closing thing, because so many of our members are suffering from traumatic brain injury.
Okay. I wouldn't word it that I healed myself. I would word it that I was healed. That I experienced an act of grace, a blessing from the divine, a miracle, and my brain was healed. Yes, I worked very hard at trying to heal myself. I did everything you could imagine. I did neuro rehab for 7 years. I took out all my mercury fillings. I did all sorts of detoxes, cleanses, everything. I did everything I could to try and heal myself. But I actually came to the point of understanding that for whatever reason in the divine plan, my traumatic brain injury was not going to be healed. And I mentioned, so I plan to write a book about this one day, but my philosophy I learned much earlier in life was, no matter what life gives you, try to look at the positive, look at the cup half full rather than half empty. And so I tried to make the best of my disabled life, to celebrate what I was still able to do. I was still able to express my love for others. I was still able to have a very quiet, slow-paced life. I relearned how to meditate. It took many, many years to relearn how to meditate. So I focused very much on that. But I could always pray, and I could always love God. My love could not be destroyed. That could not be taken from me. And that became like my rock, my faith and my love. And also just the knowing, the absolute knowing that this was not a punishment and I hadn't done something bad, which some, people rather cruelly said to me, oh boy, you must have some really bad karma that this happened to you. And I just knew, no, that is not true, because I experienced that love on the other side. I didn't know why I had to be disabled. I didn't know why that was the divine plan. I had no idea I was going to eventually be healed. I thought I was going to be disabled for the rest of my life. But I just trusted. I just absolutely trusted that the divine plan was good, and that there was some positive reason. Even if I didn't understand it, I so trusted the love of the higher power, that there must be some reason, which is good, why I'm going through this experience. And I accepted that. And I read that maybe I was burning off a lot of my own karma. And I thought, okay, if this is the way the good Lord wants me to burn off a lot of my karma, I accept. Burn, karma, burn. I used to make a little joke out of it. Burn, karma, burn. And then I also read that metaphysically, that we can, through our physical bodies, also burn off the karma of those people we love and that we're praying for. And, you know, I was praying for a lot of people. And I thought, I accept that too. If I'm burning off other people's karma for people I love through my prayers, I accept that. I will do that. And I accepted that. And it gave me like a meaning for the challenges I was going through. You know, that if I'm burning off my karma and if I'm burning off other people's karma, I accept. And I did my best to love God and just live as good a life as I could as a disabled person, focused on my prayer and meditation. And then lo and behold, surprise! The good Lord surprised me February 24th, 2016 with a healing experience. Says, well, Yvonne, we've got more work for you on the planet. And here I am.
Yeah, and I want to underline acceptance and surrender. You accepted wholeheartedly and surrendered to what is versus woe is me or the past. And that's what's so amazing, that you did that. And we're so grateful. When is the Pacific Rim Sharing Group?
It is on Saturday, February the 5th at 6 p.m. Eastern. So that's 3 p.m. Pacific. I think that's 1 in Hawaii.
Yeah. And so it's a great time for all of us in Hawaii and our members in Singapore and down under to come to the sharing group, which is really nice. I hope that you will all attend. Hopefully in the next, within the next year, because this is such a great way to start off the year with you. And soon we will have Robert tell his stories of how he was CHP officer, furthest thing from spiritual experiencer, and then started having his experiences. So that will be very exciting. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. The links are in there. If you sign up for the newsletter, you'll for sure know when the sharing group is, because as people know, I've been putting the SAI sharing groups in there. Also, if you subscribe to our new YouTube channel, then you'll know when we upload the video of tonight. And thank you all for coming. It's been a wonderful evening. We look forward to seeing you. And thank you, Susan, for being our wonderful moderator, and for Ali for your beautiful meditation. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Aloha.
Aloha.